She tried to stay behind her walls, quiet, composed, untouchable. But every time she pulled away, I found myself reaching closer, not to win her, but to understand why I couldn't let her go. I first saw her on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that hums quietly in the background of your life until something or someone makes you remember it forever. She sat by the window of the cafe I always came to after work, a sketchbook open before her, a half-finished cup of jasmine tea beside it. The light that poured in from the window framed her like a painting, soft, restrained, and untouchably calm. She wasn't the kind of woman who asked for attention. She didn't need to. There was something about the way she carried herself, precise, self-contained, that told the world to keep its distance. And yet, even from across the room, I could tell she wasn't cold, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much heart for too long. Her eyes would occasionally lift from the page, scanning the room as if to confirm she was still invisible. But when they met mine just for a second, I forgot how to look away. There was no flirtation in her gaze, no smile to invite conversation. But there was something else. Something quiet, like a pulse of recognition, as if she'd seen someone like me before, someone who might accidentally get too close. She finished her tea, closed her sketchbook, and left a few coins on the saucer. No hesitation, no lingering. The small bell above the door rang softly as she stepped out into the late afternoon light. Gone before I could think of anything to say. I didn't expect to see her again. People like her, composed, self-protective, rarely stay long enough to be noticed twice. But as the days passed, I found myself returning to that cafe more often than I'd like to admit. Sometimes I'd tell myself it was for the quiet, or the coffee, or the view from the window. But deep down, I was waiting for that faint trace of jasmine in the air, for the sound of her pencil against paper, for the small reminder that not everyone who seems distant wants to be alone. When she finally did return, a few days later, she sat at the same table by the window, back straight, lips pressed together in concentration, as if the world outside didn't exist. And still, I noticed everything. The way her sleeve slipped slightly as she reached for her cup. The faint line between her brows when she was lost in thought. There was grace in her restraint, a kind of beauty that didn't try to be seen. She glanced up once, catching my eyes again. This time, she gave a polite nod, small, courteous, but enough to make something inside me stir. Then she went back to her sketching, and I sat there, pretending to read, quietly realizing that this was how it would begin. Not with words or gestures, but with a look that said, "Don't come closer," and a feeling that said, "I already have." It was raining the next time I saw her. Not the loud kind of rain that demands attention. Just a steady drizzle that blurred the streets and softened the world. The cafe windows fogged at the corners, turning everything outside into a watercolor painting. She was already there when I walked in, sitting at her usual spot by the window. A pale blue scarf rested around her neck, a few strands of hair damp from the mist outside. She didn't look up when I entered. Her focus was on the small notebook in front of her, her pen moving in slow, thoughtful lines. I took my seat a few tables away, pretending not to notice her, though every part of me already had. There was comfort in her presence now, even in silence, like a familiar song playing softly in another room. When I ordered, the barista smiled apologetically. "We're out of umbrellas," she said. "People keep borrowing them and forgetting to bring them back." I laughed it off, glancing toward the window. The rain was getting heavier. I hadn't planned on staying long, but fate apparently had other ideas. An hour later, as I stood by the door watching the downpour, I heard her voice for the first time. "You don't have an umbrella either?" Her tone was calm, slightly amused, with a warmth that felt unexpected, like sunlight through clouds. I turned. She was standing there, holding one of those small black foldable umbrellas, the kind that barely covered one person, let alone two. "Seems I don't," I said, smiling. "You always this prepared?" "Old habits," she replied. "I've learned not to trust the weather, or people who say they'll bring umbrellas back." We both laughed quietly. It was the kind of shared humor that dissolves tension without trying. Outside, the rain fell harder. She hesitated for a moment, then tilted her head slightly. "Come on. I'm parked close. You'll at least stay dry until the corner." The umbrella barely covered us, forcing us close enough for me to notice everything. The faint scent of lavender on her scarf, the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine, the rhythm of her breath matching the rain. She held the umbrella high for me, though it left her hair catching stray drops. "You're getting wet," I said. "It's fine," she murmured. "I don't melt easily." We both smiled. The street was nearly empty, and the sound of the rain filled the spaces our words didn't. It wasn't a long walk, but I remember every second of it. The way her voice softened when she spoke, the quiet laugh she tried to hide, the unspoken ease that slipped between us like something fragile and new. When we reached her car, she turned to me, her hand resting lightly on the umbrella handle. "You should get one of your own," she said. "I was thinking," I replied. "Maybe I'll just wait for it to rain again." For a moment, she didn't answer, just looked at me, really looked, with something uncertain flickering in her eyes. Then she smiled, small and real. "Take care," she said. She got in her car and drove off into the gray evening, leaving me standing there, half soaked, half smiling, and completely certain that I wanted to see her again. After that rainy evening, something shifted, at least for me. I began to notice her presence in ways I hadn't before. The subtle rhythm of her visits, the hour she preferred, even the way she stirred her tea before taking the first sip. I never planned to meet her there, not deliberately, or at least that's what I told myself. But somehow, I always ended up at the cafe around the same time she did. First, she didn't seem to mind. A polite nod, a soft hello, sometimes even a quiet comment about the weather or the book I was reading. Those small exchanges became the quiet punctuation marks in my week, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. Then, almost without warning, the distance began. One morning she walked in, saw me, and chose a seat across the room instead of her usual table by the window. I told myself it was coincidence. But the next time, she ordered her tea to go. The time after that, she left before I could even say hello. There wasn't any anger in it, no coldness, just a quiet, deliberate withdrawal, like she'd remembered something she was trying to forget. I tried not to chase it. She didn't owe me her time or her presence. But the absence stung in a way I couldn't explain, like losing a melody you'd only just learned to hum. One evening, just as I was about to leave, she walked in unexpectedly. Our eyes met for a brief second. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to stay or go. Then, perhaps out of politeness, she approached my table. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," I said quietly. Her expression softened, a mix of surprise and something gentler. "You didn't," she replied. "I just needed some space." She looked away, fiddling with her ring, a small silver band she always wore on her right hand. "I've spent a long time keeping things simple," she added, her voice barely above the hum of the cafe. "It's easier that way." I nodded, though the words landed heavier than she intended. "I'm not trying to make things complicated," I said. "Sometimes it's just nice to have someone to talk to." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds gratitude and regret in the same breath. "You're kind," she said softly. "That's exactly why I should be careful." Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, sighed, and stood. "Take care of yourself," she murmured, her tone final but gentle. As she walked away, I noticed her pause at the door, hand resting for a moment on the frame before she pushed it open. That tiny hesitation, that single silent beat, told me more than any word she could have said. She wanted distance, yes, but not because she didn't feel something. She wanted distance because she did. It was by chance that I saw her again, though by now, I'd stopped believing in coincidence. A local art exhibit had opened downtown, a small community show tucked inside an old building that smelled faintly of varnish and coffee. I'd gone because I needed distraction, but halfway through the gallery, there she was, standing quietly in front of a painting. She hadn't noticed me yet. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands brushing her neck. She wore a charcoal gray dress, simple but elegant, and held her clutch close to her chest like a small shield. There was a stillness about her. Not cold, just self-contained, like someone who'd learned to move carefully through fragile spaces. When I finally walked over, I realized she was looking at her own work. The nameplate read her name, Layla Hassan, followed by the title, Bridge at Dusk. It was a haunting piece. A narrow wooden bridge stretching into fog, one end disappearing into the unknown. The colors bled softly into one another. Twilight blues, muted golds, and shadows that felt almost alive. "It's beautiful," I said quietly, standing beside her. She turned slightly, startled at first, then softened. "You came," she said. "I didn't think this would be your kind of place." "I didn't think it would be yours either," I replied with a smile. She gave a small laugh, genuine, unguarded. "I used to paint a lot," she said, her eyes still on the canvas. "Stopped for a while. Life got busy." There was a pause. "This one," she added, "it's about crossing over, when you're not sure what's waiting on the other side." I could hear the weight in her words, the quiet ache behind them. "That sounds familiar," I said softly. She glanced at me then, really looked. For the first time, her expression wasn't measured or polite. It was open, almost vulnerable. "You ever feel like you've spent years standing on that bridge?" she asked. "Every day," I answered. For a while, we just stood there. Two people who had no reason to understand each other, and yet somehow did. Around us, the crowd moved and murmured, but it felt like the world had narrowed to the soft hum of the gallery lights and the space between us. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quiet. "You shouldn't wait for people like me," she said. "I've gotten too used to standing still." "Maybe," I said gently, "you just needed someone who'd stand still with you." Something in her eyes flickered, surprise, fear, maybe hope. It didn't matter which. She didn't look away this time. As the lights dimmed for closing, she reached for her coat, hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Thank you for seeing it," she said, and I knew she wasn't talking about the painting. That night, I walked home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet certainty that the distance between us wasn't endless after all. A week passed after the exhibit before I saw her again. It was a quiet evening, the kind that carries the weight of unspoken things. The city lights glowed faintly through the mist, and the night felt slower somehow, like it was waiting for something to happen. I'd been sitting on my apartment balcony, a paperback open but unread in my hands, when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, there she was. She stood there with that same careful composure she always wore, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. In her hand was the book I'd lent her weeks ago, a novel we'd once talked about over coffee, the one she'd said she wanted to finish someday. "I thought I should return this," she said, her voice soft, uncertain. "You could have just kept it," I replied. "I didn't think you'd walk all this way for a paperback." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't about the book." The air between us shifted then. Not dramatically, but enough that every small sound suddenly felt louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the city outside, the faint rustle of her scarf as she stepped inside. I led her to the balcony, where string lights cast a warm amber glow across the small space. She looked around, the worn wooden chairs, the potted plants, the half-empty mug on the table, and something about the simplicity seemed to ease her. "It's peaceful here," she said, resting her hands on the railing. "It tries to be," I said with a smile. "The world gets too loud sometimes." We stood there for a while, side by side, watching the lights below flicker like restless stars. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, meaningful, full of everything neither of us dared to say. She broke it first. "You know people would talk," she murmured, "if they saw us like this." "I know," I said. "Let them." She turned to me then, really turned, and I saw it in her eyes. The fear, the longing, the quiet war she'd been fighting inside herself. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I've lived long enough to know how things like this end. Maybe they don't have to end the same way this time," I said quietly. For a moment, She just looked at me, searching my face for something. Maybe a sign that I didn't mean it or that I'd eventually give up. But I didn't move. I didn't fill the silence. I just stayed. Her gaze softened, and she exhaled, almost like surrender. "You make it hard to stay away," she admitted, barely audible. I smiled. "That's not my intention." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it harder." When she set the book down, her hand brushed mine. Light, fleeting, electric. Neither of us pulled away. The string lights flickered gently above us, and the air grew still, holding its breath with us. She didn't say goodbye when she left that night. Just a quiet, lingering look. A silent question neither of us could yet answer. And as the door closed behind her, I realized something. Words could only go so far. But the silence we shared, it said everything. The days after that night felt different, quieter, heavier. We didn't see each other for nearly a week, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything left unsaid. The kind of silence that lingers like a held breath, waiting to be released. When I finally saw her again, it wasn't planned. The sun was beginning to set over the park near the café, that golden hour when everything looks softer than it really is. I was sitting on a bench, watching the light ripple through the trees, when I saw her walking down the path. She looked surprised to see me. For a second, I thought she might turn around. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled faintly. The kind of smile that hides exhaustion. "Do you always haunt the same places?" she asked, her tone gentle, teasing. "Maybe I'm just hoping they'll remind me of you," I said. She shook her head, trying not to smile. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I might start believing them." The air between us went still. The sounds of the park, children laughing, dogs barking, the distant hum of traffic, faded into something distant. It was just her and me, standing on a patch of fading sunlight, both pretending not to be afraid of what came next. She sat beside me, close enough for her perfume to find me again, that familiar scent of lavender and something faintly sweet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I did. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly. Her eyes closed briefly, as if she already knew. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't." But I couldn't stop. "I've tried to stay away, to respect the space you wanted. I told myself it was nothing, that I just admired you, that it would fade. But it hasn't. It's grown. And I think you know that." Her hands tightened around her bag. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "You don't understand, do you?" she said softly. "I'm not what you think. I've already lived through the part of life where things fall apart. I've already learned what it costs to feel too much. I'm not asking you to risk anything," I said. "Just to be honest with me." Finally, she turned, her eyes glassy, her voice trembling. "And what if honesty ruins the only peace I have left?" I shook my head. Then maybe it wasn't peace. Maybe it was just quiet. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't love someone who's already halfway gone." "I don't care," I said. "It doesn't feel wrong to me." Something in her broke then, the last wall she'd been holding up. I saw it in the way her shoulders trembled, the way she blinked too fast to hide the tears. And when she finally met my gaze again, I saw it there, the same feeling she'd spent all this time trying to bury. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because in that fading light, when I reached out and took her hand, she didn't pull away. It had been weeks since that evening in the park. We hadn't made promises, hadn't spoken of what came next. But something between us had quietly changed, like a door had finally opened, and neither of us was rushing to step through, afraid it might close again. I saw her again one morning at the café, the same place where everything had begun. The light was different this time, softer, golden. She was already seated by the window, the same table she'd always chosen, but she wasn't sketching today. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes following the slow movement of people outside. When she saw me walk in, she didn't look away. For the first time, there was no guarded politeness, no hesitation. Just a quiet smile, small but certain. I approached her table slowly, half afraid the moment might break if I moved too fast. You came back, I said. She nodded. So did you. There was a simplicity to it, that exchange. Two people who had spent so long overthinking what could never be simple, now realizing that maybe it didn't have to be. I sat across from her, and for a while we just existed in silence. The clinking of cups, the hum of soft music, the morning sun spilling through the glass. It all felt familiar, but new at the same time. I used to come here to be alone, she said quietly, to convince myself that solitude was easier than disappointment. And now? I asked. She looked at me, really looked, and there was warmth in her gaze, unguarded and real. Now I come because I know someone will sit with me. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. All the hesitations, all the pauses, all the almost goodbyes. They settled quietly between us, finally at peace. I reached across the table, and this time, when my hand touched hers, she didn't flinch. Her fingers were warm, steady, the kind of touch that didn't ask for anything more than presence. I was afraid, she said softly, of what people might think, of how easily something this fragile could fall apart. I'm afraid too, I admitted, but I'd rather be afraid with you than safe without you. She smiled then. Not the polite curve of her lips I'd seen before, but something deeper. You shouldn't make promises you can't keep, she murmured. I'm not, I said. I'm just telling the truth. Outside, the city began to stir. Cars moving, conversations rising, life resuming its rhythm. But at that table, time felt suspended. There was no rush, no tension. Just the soft, shared understanding that neither of us was pretending anymore. She lifted her cup and poured me tea from her pot, as if she'd been doing it for years. And when our hands brushed again, she didn't pull away. No declarations. No need for them. Just quiet certainty. The kind that comes when a heart finally stops resisting what it's always wanted. She had tried to stay distant, and I had tried harder not to let her. But in the end, neither of us had to try anymore. We'd simply arrived together,